I am recording to the door broken.
No, it's just it was in the way slightly.
Oh, sorry.
The conversation wasn't recorded about me saying it.
No. Although if you keep talking now, it will be. So you know. Oh dear. Right. Okay. Hopefully, most of the stuff you guys know. We're gonna draw names out of a hat in 40 minutes for who's in what group for putting together the actual presentation for this. So, yeah, I think we ended up with a 3, a 3, and a 2, haven't we? Because Natasha's not. Is that right? Yeah.
I think that's what you said. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, we could do 2s. I think we should do 2s because that makes everybody fair. Let's do 2s. Yeah. Cool. And then we may have to change the parameters a little bit.
Is that for
Presentation.
Group methods. Would that be a group methods?
Yep. Yeah. I'll just do names like that. So it's all fair. Gathering quantitative data. What's the difference between quantitative and qualitative data?
Numbers
Versus.
like words.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. Numbers versus words. Yeah. Quantitative, quantifiable, quanting is not a word. Qualitative is most research in genetic counselling seems to be qualitative at the moment still. Have you noticed this?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts and opinions on that, or do you not care?
Harder to validate the graph.
Well, it's hard to measure things, like you need to make those validated questionnaires first in order to make something quantitative. Right?
Yeah, you guys will probably be more familiar in general with this stuff here, which is quantitative. Depending on your kind of academic background, people who come from a social sciences background are normally more happy with qualitative. People who come from a science background are more happy with quantitative.
Could it be like biased in a way that some people could give a really in-depth answer and some people would just say a few words?
Yes. What do you mean? Qualitative is yeah. Qualitative isn't supposed to be on. This is where I think a lot of people make mistakes. A, qualitative isn't supposed to be unbiased, and B, qualitative isn't supposed to be generalizable. This is where even a lot of qualitative researchers make a mistake in that they think that their research is generalizable, but it's not, because that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be explorative. So qualitative, I think the reason why a lot of genetic counselling stuff at the moment is qualitative still is because it's a fairly new discipline, and yeah, therefore, whenever something is new, whenever something is newly being researched properly, you probably don't know yet what there is to measure. Therefore, as a result, you might want to do some qualitative interviewee type things with people to get an idea of what's out there. That's the way it should be done, and then you should measure it. So whenever we were talking about preference earlier on, it's like, well, you have to think, is that a scientific term? Is it something that has been defined that I think it can be defined because we're using it as a word, but maybe it hasn't been defined. Maybe there's no measure of preference out there. So maybe you'd have to go and talk to a whole bunch of people first of all to figure out what does prefer mean. And you had to very quickly in the back of an envelope decide, right, preference is taste and ethics and whatever else. And you had different ideas about what preference was. So whenever something is new like that, think about it qualitatively can be useful. But then once you've done that, in order to actually have anything that means anything with the data, you need to then measure it, I think. But that's a mistake a lot of people make. Yeah, so quantitative comes from the scientific method, obviously. It comes from the idea that, come back to what we had earlier on about ontology. The assumption was and is that there is something out there that is real and is consistent, right? And can be discovered. So temperature is a thing that is real and consistent and can be discovered. The idea is that preference is also a thing that is real and measurable and can be discovered. That's the quantitative assumptions. Therefore, it can be represented in numerical form temperature exists and it can be measured from 0 to 100, etc. The measurement of 0 to 100 isn't the thing. So like a thermometer isn't temperature, but a thermometer regularly measures the thing that is there, the phenomena that is there, that is temperature. So that's the idea with quantitative. And with quantitative stats that we're doing here, the idea is that, yeah, again, you've done it all with biological measures before. The idea in social sciences basically is that you can take those principles of quantitative measurement and you can translate them into the psychological and, by extension, the social spheres. Okay, so the idea is that biological is there and is measurable and is somehow objective. The idea is that the psychological arises from the biological, right? So it's like there's no ghost in the machine. There's no Descartesian duality going on here. It's the reason why people's minds are similar in a lot of ways, and they must be similar because we can communicate with each other. The reason why they're similar in a lot of ways is because your mind emerges from your biology, and your biology all is, shared. So therefore, there must be things that are measurable. So let's come back to last week. I was saying what is real in psychology. It's like, well, fear is probably real. Pain is probably real. In the same way that blood pressure is real and is measurable. Often looks like this. You guys know this. You don't need to tell you that. Yeah. So we're going to be focusing on quantitative for this and show you how it kind of translates into social sciences. Qualitative, numbers versus words, trends versus meaning, as well. I did a study once looking at binge drinking in college students in West Scotland, so community college is the kind of equivalent in the States. Looking at what was it's for the NHS. It was looking at their binge drinking habits and if the NHS could do anything about it, basically. So we did quantitative. That we looked at how is binge drinking defined. It's defined by how many units people drink over a certain period of time, and we measured people's drinking. Got them to tell us self-report about how often drink. The definition at the time was 5 units in one sitting over the past 2 weeks, which translates as 2.5 pints. We couldn't find a control group. There was not a control group, so we had to actually alter the definition of binge drinking in order to find a control group. So fine, quantifiable, measurable, known numbers, trends, blah, blah, blah. Great. We also did a qualitative side of it where we asked them, what do you think about binge drinking? Are you binge drinkers? What should you do about it? Blah, blah, blah. Found something very interesting. We found that they didn't think of binge drinking in terms of number of units that they drank. They thought about it in terms of 2 things. One of the best quotes was somebody saying, we're not binge drinkers, we're students. So I didn't know the 2 things were different. According to them, they are. The idea was that, number one, because they were, so binge drinking for them was based on number one, social class. So because they were students, they saw themselves as being in a higher social class as people who were not studying, and therefore when those people drank, they were binge drinkers, but we're not binge drinkers because we're in social class. And the other thing they based it on was behavior when you were drunk. So you weren't a binge drinker, providing that you could hold your drink. If you were, asleep in the gutter in your own vomit, then you were a binge drinker, regardless of how much you had. But if you could drink 6, 7, 8, 12 pints, 15 pints, and not have any negative social consequences, then you weren't a binge drinker, right?
And in like the social class thing, do you think it was like because it's more accepted to drink as a student, like people do?
I think it was, yes, I think it was to do with identity, and
like rather than social class.
I mean, but they are thinking it in their age group. In my age group, I am of a higher social standing because I am a university student.
That's the way they saw it. That's the way they
Right?
saw it.
Really? People
Yeah.
think that.
Sorry?
People think that.
There you go. Yeah. So it wasn't university students. It was community college students. So they were generally from a working class background, but within their context, their peers who they saw themselves as being in a higher grouping to, were their peers who had left school and either gone to minimum wage jobs or were unemployed, etc., etc. So they saw themselves as being in a higher social status, and therefore as a result, their alcohol consumption was irrelevant to whether they classified themselves as binge drinkers. So you go, right. I think that's a good example of where it's useful to marry the two together, to do mixed methods, to do qualitative and quantitative, because scientists are all concerned about alcohol consumption, number of units, how much is in your blood, blah, blah, blah. Didn't mean anything to these kids at all. Nothing. It wasn't like we're not talking about the same thing, as they're talking about. So that was important, because then you have to then change the language that you use in your discussions with them, because right, okay, they're not meaning the same thing, so maybe we drop the term binge drinking altogether and we call it something else. We just call it drinking. By the time those were this big Scottish government drive about policies behind binge drinking, etc., and binge drinking is being seen as a sort of a similar category to alcoholism but different, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's where it can be kind of useful to sort of think about the two as different. Strengths of quantitative, relatively quick and easy. You guys went and you did a quantitative study. As you were doing it, you may have been thinking, could have that, but we don't, you could be thinking that there's qualitative things we could do, but it takes too much time. You can get a larger sample as well. With qualitative studies, like again, this is poor research done badly. You see people with qualitative studies trying to get a big sample, but you lose a whole bunch of the nuance that you're looking for, because you're using up too much data to analyze, and also you're not trying to generalize anyway. You're just trying to find trends and ideas. So like, how much depth can you really get from asking 150 people, about what they think about genetic counselling or something? Maybe that is why you need 15. Because you want to get you want to spend 2 hours with each person in depth, rather than get 150 people and then give them a text box this size to fill in. Representative, again, this is the big difference. Because qualitative is small, because it's in depth, because it's in detail, there is no procedure by which you can go from 3 people said this and 3 people thought this to therefore this is what the trend is. Okay. You can ask people in this room, what they think about Costa Coffee or Starbucks, or you can ask them what they think about the NHS or whatever. And it's like, well, it's not enough people, basically. It's just not enough. Yeah. Sampling is the huge issue. Go down to the River Clyde, fill this cup with water, and what you'll find is that there's no fish in it. So therefore you go, oh, there's no fish in the Clyde. No, your sampling is wrong. Your sampling is, you do not have a big enough sample of the Clyde to say that. It's the same thing with people. It's not. In America, it's funny because you think these things are kind of abstract, vague concepts that are kind of boring and to do with research, and they kind of are. But when you look at politics, and there's a guy that comes up all the time, did you see in America Elizabeth Warren the other day with the whole, was it Monday, with the whole leak of the Supreme Court draft paper about the changing abortion laws, and Elizabeth Warren, who's feel free to shut windows open and all that. Elizabeth Warren, was the Democratic leader of the House, is that right? Something like that. She was storming around, going, this is awful because 64% of people in the US agree with Roe versus Wade and agree with abortion rights. And it's like, I would love to have stopped her and said, I want to know what the sampling technique was there, which is very boring. But it's like, okay, so it would be, It would be great to, sample versus population. It would be great to know exactly what everyone in the USA thought about that particular ruling, right? And then you could say, well, we can, ask every single person. The problem is people's opinions change as well, so who the heck knows? But if you get a snapshot of every single person on, Tuesday afternoon, whatever, and ask them, and then you could say, right, now we can see exactly what we should do, because if we're going with democracy, and regardless of whether you agree with this or not, if we're just going with purely democracy, then this percent say that, this percent say that. As long as one's over 50, we're done, we're fine. End of discussion. But that never happens, and therefore it's only ever based on sampling, and maybe the sampling's done well, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it is funny how, again, you find this with research, you find that people who do research always find what they want to find. It's kind of annoying.
But Nicola Sturgeon's now saying that, or she has been saying that such a high percent are going to go for independence, but I think.
And again, it's like we're
still pretty
even, yeah.
even.
And again, it's like where did that come from? That stat, and what was the sampling methods? And yeah, whenever anybody on either side of any debate comes up with figures like that, I basically ignore them, because I'm like, your sampling was probably biased, because it usually is, and therefore there's probably some ambiguity to it. The ambiguity, and then especially when it's something like Scottish independence vote, which was 52% last time, so I mean, if you ask people an hour later, you would have got a different result. Never mind, whatever. Yeah, so it does sound very boring when you think about sampling, but it actually matters, because it's like this is the kind of garbage that people on any side of any political divide are kind of fighting about. Who is Kelvin Bridge, Kelvin Grove, all of that. Pardon? Really?
No.
Go into the Hunterston. Hunterian, sorry. What's the Hunterston? That's a nuclear power station. It's a different place. Go into the Hunterian, and at the top level, the round at the top, half of it is all of his stuff. Because he was really into the idea of measurement. And he was also one of your Enlightenment thinkers. Kelvin, exactly. Kelvin temperature. Yeah. So he was all into measurement. And there's all kind of wacky, things up there, really kind of like, Doctor Who, Victorian wizard type contraptions, that are all about how to measure the curvature of the earth and who the fuck knows, whatever. But to measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Right? Like, we should all get that tattooed on our face. As scientists, you should have to get it tattooed on your arm when you become a student or a member of staff at Glasgow Uni.
Like the engineers that get a silver ring when they graduate.
A silver brain.
Ring.
A silver brain, a silver ring.
Yeah, they get a ring when engineers, at least at home.
Do they?
They get a ring as like a symbol of their commitment to like public safety, kind of. Like it comes from this idea. There was this, I think, from this bridge that was built that ended up collapsing, and like the reasons for its collapse are likely due to the fault of the engineers. And so this is like
their kind of reminder.
Yeah, reminder.
Yeah, we should get that. Honestly, we should all have this tattooed on our arms. It's like, yeah, if you can't measure it, I'm not interested. Basically, if you can't define it and you can't measure it, then I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So, what we got? Taste, ethics, value, convenience, variety of products. That's your things up there. Yeah, it's like I would need each of them to be defined in. Well, they are measured. I mean, you are measuring them. Which is great. 1 to 5, fine, great. Okay, it's not, like I say, it's not without its problems, but quantitative. Very structured, and you can't ask questions / clarification. So yeah, the person who said I only go to pray, the person who stormed off and took all their friends with them. It's like, I would really like to know what was going on there. If you're a quantitative researcher, there's no real mechanism to do that. Yeah, the specificity, if that's the word, means that you lose some of the nuance and the detail. Yeah, and therefore it can be difficult. Isolated from context, obviously. But that doesn't, none of this means that it's not good. It just means that these are limitations. You're getting cold. Don't know why my cardigan's half out the window. Don't know why I did that. That's probably better. You can be too warm now, but wearing a big onesie thing.
I feel okay now.
Okay. Like to make sure that you're all okay. Design of an instrument for data can take a long time. I think it's easy to, well, as you can see, you think, oh yeah, we'll just throw together some questions, but very quickly you go, oh, actually, it's going to be a bit difficult to do. So how you measure stuff actually really matters. Strength and qualitative are the opposite of the strength and quantitative. So the flexibility. If you ever listen to a qualitative interview done badly, it's like they have a list of like 5 questions, and then they just ask them, just read out those questions, and then give the person an answer. And there's no back and forth. There's no communication. It's like, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's like they may as well be a computer reading them the questions, and they're talking into a Zoom recording or something. And it's like, no, that's the dynamic and the story that's being told and the human interaction is the interesting bit. See, I would like you to chase after that person and say, yeah,
It's already embarrassed.
yeah, I know, that's right. I'm right. But go and find them now. Yeah, so you can see obviously what the differences are. Yeah, and so qualitative use well should be used for generating theory. So generating theory that can then be tested. So you should go in there with an idea, or not with an idea of what you expect to find, don't know. And then you'll get people's opinions and people's views, etc., on human things that are fairly complicated and fairly in depth. Even something as simple as preference, you can see, is fairly complicated. So let's get people's views on it, and then let's generate some kind of idea, some kind of theory, and we can use that to test. That's the good thing about it.
Actually, I'm thinking qualitative. So basically, the first girl that I asked was an Asian student, and I asked her, can I ask you some questions about Starbucks and pasta? And she obviously didn't understand me, so she came back and just kept saying Starbucks with latte. And she said it quite a few times, so I just kind of liked
She thought you were doing an order.
She was like,
where's the latte?
does anybody want a Starbucks? That's what she thought you were saying.
Yeah, and I think in genetic counselling, obviously some people put translators, and it probably would be a lot of hassle to try and do some sort of thing. If there's a translator involved, it's already kind of complex as it is. So would that kind of make stuff skewed as well?
Yeah, so you've got the additional. Yeah. Humans are the most complicated thing in the universe. An individual human brain is literally the most complicated thing in the whole universe. And if you get then together a human brain within the context of its whole body, and then within the context of other human beings, that's a fairly complex phenomenon to try to research. So therefore, and things like the extra barrier of culture, and well, even maybe there was a culture barrier in terms of you guys and the folks you were looking at, because you guys didn't know that over here Starbucks is kind of disdained a little bit. So maybe because you guys, again making this up, maybe because you guys know that there's that little bit of disdain in there for Starbucks, maybe you communicated that somewhere. Maybe these guys didn't, who knows? Yeah, so having that extra kind of layer of a translator and a cultural barriers, etc., can make things even more difficult. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I just thought of that girl over there.
Yeah. People are complicated.
I kind of gave off and was like, it's too embarrassing.
Yeah. So we've not got the people with cultural issues, cultural differences, and we've also not got people who stormed away. Yeah, in our sample.
Yeah.
Kind of. So it's kind of like, okay, so it tells us something, but it misses other people. Yep. No study's perfect, right? Mixed methods approach is kind of using both. It's probably the best way to do most research projects. Unless what you're looking at has been studied the hell out of a lot before. Okay. Populations versus samples. We kind of did this earlier up there. The research question is only about certain people. It's not about everyone who's ever lived, obviously. So it's important to think, first of all, who your population are. Women suffer from breast cancer, parents of children with Down syndrome, male parents of children with Down syndrome in Scotland who have used a Class A drug at least once in the last month. So your population can be big. So women suffering from breast cancer, will be into the millions, potentially hundreds of millions, well, certainly tens of millions of people. It's a heck of a lot. The last thing there, your population might be like 10 people, but that's okay. That's who your population is, and it's important to know who your population is, because that will grossly change what your sample size needs to be. You can't include everybody in your sample size. This is the only reason for talking about p-values and significance earlier on. It's the only reason that we need p-values and significance, is that you can't collect data from everybody. It's not practical. If you could collect data from everybody in your population, then you would just know the answer. It's like, yeah, we'll get in America, how many people are for or against abortion? If you could ask them all, you would just know, but then it's just not practical to do that. So we need some way to figure if the people we've got in our sample are in any way representative of the population. That's what p-values do. Samples, yep. So we think this idea of, we want a sample to be representative. So again, go into the Clyde, pick up a cup of water. It's like, well, did every single molecule in the Clyde have the same chance of ending up in my cup of water? No, it didn't. Or every single, it didn't, because it's just not practical. Again, be modest in the aims that you state. We did random sampling. No, you didn't. Nobody ever does random sampling, unless your population is very practicable. So again, if there only was, if there was, what's that one there? Male parents of children with Down syndrome in Scotland who have used a class of drug last month. If there was some list of those 10 people, and then you got a computer to randomly choose them, and you were 100% sure there wasn't anybody who was not on that list, then that is a random sample, but that's very unlikely. If you sampled only adult patients attending a particular service at a particular time, you cannot say that they represent anything else. Okay, so again, you see this with studies a lot. It's like, they say, we had a random sample of people attending the Govan clinic on a Tuesday afternoon in November. It's like, well, that's not exactly, yes, that's not everybody with breast cancer, because nobody in Nevada had a chance of being in your sample. So what are you talking about? E.g., this study concludes that a majority of patients attending service X in 2017 said the quality of the soup improved after the chef was set. That's all that it tells you. Again, this is why scientists don't make, I said this last week, why scientists don't make good kind of like talking heads on TV, because all of their claims are and should be tentative and couched in caveats and maybes, and that's not what people want to hear. People want certainty. Sample selection bias occurs when there's a major and systematic difference between the people who you got and the people who's in the population. So, for example, right, we asked for volunteers in this study. Why is that a biasing thing to do? Why does that introduce bias?
Some people wouldn't, like certain demographic maybe wouldn't be listening to the radio, like.
These are two different things. Sorry. So
volunteers. Okay.
Yeah. So you went to a clinic and you said, right, we're going to ask for people's views on breast cancer. Maybe it's a breast cancer screening clinic, and then you say, right, can I have volunteers? What bias is introduced there?
Some people don't have appointments for that.
True, but and what might make one person want to volunteer, one person not want to volunteer?
People have got time.
People have got time. Yep. Who's less likely to have time? People who people who work, people who are caring for others. Yeah, exactly. So time. What else might make one person more likely to volunteer?
Another incentive, like that they think that they can get out of it, whether that's like more on the altruistic side or more on the actual like they think that this will move them, give them something, even though it might not.
So their motivations. Yeah.
Some people might upset when some people might have a really good appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some might have bad, and you might not want to stay around and speak to someone about it.
So what would that be? So the more emotionally upset. yeah, the more, or just the more negative emotion somebody's experienced at the time, the less likely they might be to volunteer. Yeah, the strength of opinion that they have, good or bad, you know. So people who are outraged, you know, will volunteer to give their opinion. People who think this was amazing will probably give you their opinion, probably less than people who are outraged. But like the vast majority of people might exactly TripAdvisor. Exactly. Yeah. Flipping. Yeah. Nobody going, this was absolutely fine, and I forgot it the minute after I finished it. You know, it's like you never get that. You know, it's like these. You see these vans and buses and lorries and things that say, "How's my driving?" and they have a number on the back. I bet you nobody phones up and says, "That was fine." Like nobody will do that. You know, but, you know, going mad. You know, and therefore the person on the other side of people going, "Oh my goodness, our drivers are horrendous." No, they're not, because that day your driver passed 10,000 motorists and only one of them phoned up to say that the person driving was horrendous. So, you know, it's a biased sample. You know, most people don't care. You know, it's not really a message. You know, most people couldn't care less about breast cancer screening. It neither upsets them, nor does it. It's usually exciting. It's just something it's just a thing they have to do, like posting a letter. You know, that's probably true. You know, but if you look at the papers, it'll be how people find it traumatic or people find it exhilarating and, you know, meaningful. And it's probably, again, normal distribution, that those are probably extremes. You know,
people are more inclined to complain about stuff that others wouldn't think is a problem. It was like the holiday to Egypt, and it's had really good reviews, and there's one person who gave it 1 star, and it was something like it was music with swear words, which may be inappropriate for family members. And we were like, well, the last place we looked at said the kids club person was dealing drugs to the guests. That's a pretty big thing to complain about. And then this one we looked at.
Some people might see that as a positive. Oh, great. Fantastic.
But this one we've looked at, it's got a couple 1 stars, but it's like really minor things like that. So people might kind of give a 1 star, but think, oh, well, this is my opinion, but it's really bad, whereas someone else's 1 star might be really, really bad.
Going back to the 5-factor model of personality last week, people on the extremes of traits will self-select for various things. So volunteers are all people who are highly extroverted. You know, so it's like, so you could say, you know, yeah, it's like breast cancer screening works really well or is hated by extroverts. What the introverts think, we don't know, because they went home. Because they don't want to talk to us. You know, TripAdvisor reviews are all done by people who are highly conscientious, you know, or people who are high in negative emotion. You know, yeah, so it's, you know, I can't believe that they did this because this isn't the way it should be. Those people are highly conscientious, and the people who are outraged on it are the people who are high in negative emotion and would find everything annoying. You know, yeah. So you go, okay, this is personality traits being, you know, giving me. I'm finding out more about the personality traits of the sample than I am actually about the phenomenon I'm interested in.
But can you incorporate that into a study? Because obviously, like an open-ended question with the qualities, you could get those opinions and kind of match them. But if it was just,
What do you mean?
like, so say that a dog or a fox that keeps running past, positive terms difference.
I can't know it now.
You
run up the hill.
Ricky Gervais twisted his garden when there was like 5 baby foxes. It was so cute.
I love a little fox.
Yeah, like say you had a qualitative question and somebody, you could get like people's opinions, like I think this, and there's again.
And German Shepherd, yeah.
Yeah.
It's chasing a ball. It's chasing a ball.
There's some street people
Chucking it over.
walking around doing stuff.
No, it's
you could, like you could match their qualitative data to their quantitative data, because
To the personality traits.
you can say this is why they've given it 1 star, or
Yeah.
this is why this person. But then like, so that's kind of more. I'm trying hard to say this. I don't know if I'm saying it right. So then that's going to give you a completely different conclusion than
Yeah.
if it was just like all 1 stars
Yeah.
from people.
Yeah, and research should always be about trying to get to the truth, and the truth is always new. The truth is always nuanced, you know, which sucks. You know, it's like it's always a funny shade of grey, you know, and it's like, yeah, come back to the whole Celtic Rangers thing. You know, it's like, or whatever, you know, whatever phenomenon is you're interested in. You know, it's like, yeah, it'd be so simple if it was just, yeah, this screening program is brilliant and it works well. And it's like, well, yeah, it probably does do that, but it probably also does other things as well. And well, yeah, it's always messy. Yeah, I would love to see people's opinions of some kind of genetic counselling treatment based upon their personality.
Yeah, that's
Structure.
Kind of,
Yeah.
Can you incorporate it?
Yeah. I mean, that'd be fascinating. Yeah, it's like extroverts really love genetic counselling. People who are high in neuroticism hate it because to them it's just a threat. To them it's just, you're going to tell me all the things I'm going to die of. And therefore we really need to think about how we treat people who have.
But then you think, how do you then apply that to practice, right? Like, how are you going to determine which of these categories that your patient falls into? So, like, are you adding additional screening questions as you meet them to kind of guide your process?
Eventually, probably, hopefully, yeah. Look for a history of mental health, even, and if anybody, because obviously, depending on the service, you get an idea of people's history, and if they've got a history of mental health issues, then they're probably going to have more of a problem. There's 8 things in people's life. I tell you about this. There's 8 things in people's life, and if 3 of them go sideways, then they're probably going to have mental health problems. I told you about this. No. Okay. So there's what you do during the day. There's which work, look after somebody, or whatever.
Actually, 5 a.m. then getting up early.
No, don't know what that was.
How do you change that?
How do you change that?
How do you change your routine then?
Oh yeah, sorry. So that's So no, that was for people who are high negative emotion. Then for people who are high neuroticism, having messed up sleep messes up their mood even more, so they should change that. No, but this is like life's only made up of 8 things, and if 3 of them go sideways, then you're in trouble. So it's like, what do you do during the day? Do you work, or do you look after somebody, or do you not? What do you do with your spare time in the evening? Do you sit and watch Netflix for 6 hours? Do you walk the dog? Do you go to model plane classes? Well, you do it, I don't know. I don't know why I looked at you. I don't know why. Maybe you're the most likely in the room. I don't know why. Then you've got your sleep, right? So like there's your time in those 3 things. Right? Then you've got what your intimate relationships like. So the generation above you, your parents, your generation, your partner, and then the generation below you and your children. Then you've got you have any friends, right? So that's 5 things. Then you've got what do you put in your body? Drink, drugs, alcohol, medicine, food. Then you've got what's your physical exercise? What's your physical health like? And the exercise. What's your physical health like, and what's your mental health like? Do you have any mental health disorders? And so that's like 8 things. That's pretty much life. And like if 3 of those things go sideways, then anybody's going to struggle. So it's like if you lose your job, that's not good. If you lose your job and then as a result your sleep is messed up, and as a result you're grumpy, so you're shouting at your partner and they leave you, like that's going to be hard for anybody to come back from. So it's like, so maybe what you just look at is like, on those 8 things, are there 3 things that have gone sideways in somebody's life? And if they have, then genetic counselling is going to be hard for them, because you're just one more problem that they don't need. Maybe. So there you go. People who call into radio stations, again, same idea. People going to radio stations are mental anyway. Are they not? Pretty much. If you ever hear these late night talk sport, I used to listen to that.
There's one I remember on Christmas they were doing like year of, is it Jeremy Vine on radio?
Who is that? That's Radio 2, yeah.
And it was just it was like one after the other, and they all just sounded like horrible people.
What was the topic?
I can't remember. It was just like phoning in. Yeah, he has like different topics. I think it was just doing like a best of like the year. It was all like his controversial topics, and then he just did like clips of all the people that phoned in. And it's like it's not a good like advert for your.
Yeah, or it is because people listen because they want to hear hear these people. The one the other day I heard was basically a Russian sympathizer on somebody's phone in. It came up on YouTube as a and it was somebody who was I don't know what they were saying, but it was completely bananas, in terms of Ukraine stuff, and it's like yeah, you go, yeah, who's going to phone into these radio shows? You know, it's like, what do you think about genetic counselling? Give us a phone. You know, well, most people don't care. You know, as the people who phone up will be the people who had a terrible experience. You know.
But then it kind of like perpetuates like this, because I try now like to not even look at like Twitter comments, because it's kind of the same thing where like you see like the worst of people, but then you're not seeing any of like the neutrality or like nicer people. So then it just makes it seem like everyone's awful.
Like Super Scoreboard's so funny because
Yeah.
it's like angry Rangers fans and they are yelling and they're embarrassing themselves, and then they get replayed on Facebook and everyone's laughing at them. It's like, well, obviously if you are laughing, you're kind of one of the few extreme people.
Yeah, but it colors people's views. So therefore, you know, you think, oh, everybody's, you know. So again, it's you're always in some ways generalizing from the sample of the population. You know, yeah. So you could look at that and you could think, oh, all Rangers fans are crazy. You know, as a result, and it's like, no, probably the same proportion of them are crazy as Celtic fans are crazy. You know, and probably most of them are reasonable human beings for 99% of the time until you meet them on a Saturday when they'll be singing horrendous songs at you. You know, yeah. So again, it's the same thing. You know, yeah. So if you were to listen to it, or if there was, for genetics, you know, the kind of big controversies are, you know, it's like, should we be cloning and should we be designer?
Gene editing.
Sorry.
Designer babies, gene editing.
All that stuff, yeah, you know, yeah. And were you to listen to any kind of public debate forum on it, you know, it's all the horrendous people shouting, you know, and you go.
Oh no, she was walking out and the dog came like.
And all of a sudden there's a mad dog.
Was that her dog? Oh,
No.
she's trying to point into the ball. Because it nearly knocked her down.
I'm enjoying the commentary on the dog. So did I. Okay, select an unbiased sample, right? I'm not going to go through all these because in detail, right? But what you want, you should write this down on your slides. You want what type of sampling that you used. You want your sampling technique, okay? And again, it's made up. So, yeah. So sampling techniques, random sampling. Go through this. Choosing people from population at random. Every member has an equal chance of being selected. If you wanted to survey attitudes towards screening for cystic fibrosis amongst the general population in Scotland, say random samples, 200 people. How would you go about this in a random sampling way? What would you do? What could you do?
You need to like kind of look out, you know, age and ethnicity and all that kind of thing, and like I guess try and scale it down.
That's not a random sample. So that is when you're trying to match characteristics of your population to characteristics of your sample. But that's not random. That will come with what that is in a minute. What would you do? How could you do this?
Take this a census and you.
Yeah, so go to the census data.
Yeah.
And now even that's probably the closest you could ever get to, and then get a computer to randomly pick 200 names. Even that isn't random because who are you missing out?
But they don't fill out the census.
Yeah. People who are homeless as well, you know, people, anybody like that, you're missing out. So even that, so a pure random sample in some ways is never possible, you know, really, to be honest. Stratified sampling, when we know that the population contains subgroups that may differ from each other, this is what you're thinking about, in ways that we suspect could influence the outcome. So this is stratified sampling. This simply means random sampling within each subgroup of individuals, which reflects the proportion of the population. Yeah, so it might be attitudes towards breast cancer screening, and there's a reasonable reason to think that males and females will have different views on that, you know, or different, you know, perceptions of risk for breast cancer. You know, males do and can get breast cancer, although it's much less likely than females. So that, you know, might be something you'd be interested in. So therefore you'd say, right, there's no point in us looking for a general population thing and looking for a random sample and then just by sheer chance ending up with a whole bunch of males. It's like, well, that's not really, doesn't really answer the question. So therefore a stratified sample might be more useful there. Here we go, is another one. We want to survey university student attitudes towards NHS. Student records show that 30% of students are medicine, 30% are engineers, 20% are social science, 10% are arts, 10% are history, right? Whatever. Would random sampling be appropriate there? What do we think? No, why not?
representative medicine,
Why would that matter?
because like they probably know more about the actual.
Or have investment in the NHS sticking around.
They've got
Most
more,
are
yeah, probably not particularly, or certainly by their subject choice, we've no reason to think they would be either for or against or any other. Whereas, yeah, people who are studying medicine would obviously, you know, be a little bit different potentially because they've had more exposure, they've got more investment in the NHS being there, etc., etc. Yeah, so through random chance, we may have no medical students, therefore we're not really answering the question. Yeah, so there's issues there that we really need to think about, you know, so therefore we might want to instead say, right, we're going to take 30% from medicine, 10% from art, etc., which is exactly what you're saying. So that's stratified sampling. Yeah, so doing that, cool. Cluster sampling. You want to discover the use of genetic clinics amongst Glasgow's poor. Hidden populations. Hidden populations are groups of people who, for whatever reason, don't show up in data a lot. And very often, those people are the poor. The poor are very often the folks who are kind of excluded from, or people who, for whatever reason, have characteristics that make them unlikely to make themselves known to research scientists. Drug users, sorry?
criminals.
Drug users and criminals. Yeah, exactly. All the drug data is on people who attend drug services. And people who attend drug services are a vanishingly small number of people who use drugs. So therefore, it's like we're not actually, you know, we're not talking about the same thing when we're talking about drug users and we're talking about drug users who attend, you know, drug use services.
I'm just thinking, even like even if you were to go on to a more like street level with organizations that are talking to the real people, they're still they're not reaching everybody, right? Like, even if they are having some contact with people that would otherwise never be contacted.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get it.
Yeah. And it's a, it's a
And those
problem.
services don't have the time to do research.
That is true, despite the fact that we're supposed to be doing it. But yeah, in reality, yeah.
Often you can like include someone who was on drugs at 10, because you know, if you walk through Glasgow, like say a certain area, you often see a lot of, I don't know, but a lot of drug users together. who are
Really
really
good
on
point.
drugs. Could you then ask them questions?
That's a very good point. Because almost all of the drug use research is done on people who are not high. And you go, hang on a minute, we're missing out something here. Because surely that's a very good point. Nobody's ever made that point before, and that's very interesting.
Maybe some ethical issues with like,
Right, with consent.
yeah.
But also with like just like not.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but yeah, I like research that's like that, where it's a bit more kind of like edgy. Maybe that's just me. So rather than random sampling all of Glasgow citizens, it may be more practical to randomly sample citizens living in deprived areas. Okay, so there's I can never remember its name, Scottish Deprivation Index. Is that what it's called? I'm looking at you because you're from here. Somebody Google it. Lucy, Google it. Scottish Deprivation Index. Let's see what you get. Scottish Deprivation Index Quotient. I think that's what it's called. On a scale of 1 to 7, it tells you how bad the area is.
This is 10%, 20%.
What have you got when you put in Scottish Deprivation Index? What website did you get?
SIMD.
Yeah, that's it.
Index. And then
What was it called? Say again.
SIMD.
What's it stand for? Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. Yeah, that's it.
Also, it's actually taken into like different parts of the city.
Yes. Oh, it takes you into like street by street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We're running out of time. I'll show you then if
But
time.
it's like 5,000.
Yeah, turn it around so people can see.
Like, you know, from
Yeah, it tells you.
income employment.
Yeah. So you might say, right, we want to, we want to only look at people who are from the lowest levels of deprivation, for example, which is quite interesting to do. I'm not going to go through this. Case control. Cases of individuals in the population of interest: pregnant women, people with a family history of cancer, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, in this you would like compare the two groups and you would like match them up basically. Okay. Right, this is not a huge exercise, but it's just something to say. What is the average height of students in England? Would the first 50 students at an engineering lecture at Imperial College London be a suitable sample? What do you think?
No.
Yeah, so no, potentially because they're mostly male, because engineering students are mostly male. Anything else?
Also, generally, I think Imperial College is expensive, so their upbringing, they probably have if you eat the right food, then you're generally going to be taller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, there you go. So you would want to look at ways to unbias that basis. You see, right, we don't want to look at just them, we want to look at them and others. And so different sampling methods can be used for different types of study. Okay, how many participants, right? This is the thing. Is it 16? Is it 20? Is it 100? How the heck do you know, right? Answer is it depends. Depends on a whole bunch of things. Depends on how precise you want to be. Depends on what the size of differences you're trying to measure. Depends on the area of interest. What you will see is, what you should see in papers that are quantitative, in their method section, they should do something that's called a power analysis. Okay, a power analysis is a mathematical formula that, based on probabilities, will tell you the likelihood of whether you will detect a result or not if it's there. Okay. How you do a power analysis? Well, what you need for power analysis is out there. We do not have time to go into the mathematics of power analysis, but if a study doesn't do a power analysis, it's picking the numbers out of its out of its hat. That's right. Therefore, its results are potentially garbage. No power analysis, a paper should be chucked in the bin, basically. Remember that, it's important. Purposive, okay, so these convenience, accidental, or purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is what probably most studies actually do when they go, we got the people who were around at the time and we tried to do our best to kind of make it kind of randomish, but we just got who we could. That's basically what most sampling is. Okay, so going to a service and saying we're interviewing people in this service who will let us interview them is basically purposive sampling, it's not random sampling. Snowball sampling used for hidden populations, which is good. You maybe get one person who's a drug user and doesn't attend services, and you say, right, introduce me to all your friends who are drug users who use services as well. It's an interesting way of doing it. Important. Although some methods of design are better than others, the important thing is that you recognize which method you use and why. Not that you always manage to devise a perfect study. There isn't a perfect study. Like I said, random sampling doesn't really exist in real life. Okay, so it's not as if you're going, this is a bad sampling method and you have failed because you have used it. It's not that, it's that you have understood the what's the word? The limitations, the practicalities and the limitations of what you're doing, and you're choosing the sampling method as appropriate. Yeah, basically you're going to do purposive sampling. Participants chosen and recruited for different purposes. It's such a fudge. It's true. Okay. Do we have time to do this? No, we don't. That's fine. Okay, so far you should have, well, actually you shouldn't have done this yet. This is what you should do by the end of today, hopefully. You know, because I'm going to put it in your groups and then you can go away and think about it. Select a research question for your second assignment. You should be able to identify your population of interest. You should do that obviously once you know the questions. You should have some idea of sampling strategy. Okay, so you should know how to do all that, and that should all be kind of fairly clear by the end of what you know so far. Then the next thing is, right, okay, so how do you go about collecting data? That we're going to cover next week. Okay, thoughts or comments or questions or outbursts?
All my thoughts and questions are about what kind of